Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to the Backlog Battle Podcast. This is Alex, and in case this is the first time you've ever listened or watched the show, we talk to gamers from all walks of life to give us a better understanding of who they are outside of the content creator space or whatever they do, because we also interview musicians, translators, even like game writers, developers, you name it. If it has something to do with games, we chat with them. So my guest today is somebody that I've known for a long time, and I think a little bit of backstory is that I tried to get him to join the ranks of the YouTube community, and finally, as you can see from his title, like, he is a YouTube content creator. Please welcome Dr. LevelUp. How's it going, man?
It's going great. Thank you for having me on. I'm glad to be here.
I'm really excited. And moving forward on this show, I'll call you by your first name, Steven. Is that okay?
Yep. Oh, yeah, of course.
It's weird because I've never actually addressed you as Steven before. It's kind of new.
Yeah, that's all right, though. I'm all for it. Whatever someone wants to call me, that's great. I don't care.
Yeah, absolutely. So I normally start the show with the question of, like, how do you start with video games, but I want to kind of tweak it for this episode because I do have a background of where you come from a little bit, but I think what's important to me to know is, when did you start your career on Twitch? Because you started off as a Twitch streamer first before being on YouTube.
Yeah, so back 2000, and I can actually almost give you exact dates. Back probably October 2012, I stumbled across Twitch. I think it may have still been Justin TV at that point. I don't quite remember. It was at the infancy of Twitch. And I started watching all these people play games and chat, and I'm like, this is really cool. I want to do this. And I had no equipment to do it with. I tried to make it work with installing Windows, because you had to have Windows back then. Installing Windows on my really old MacBook, and no, it was an iMac, and using Adobe Flash Media Encoder, which for some of you all who've streamed for a long time, you remember that. I could not make it work, and I ended up just watching a lot of streams and really just enjoying people gush over some of my favorite games growing up, watching all these folks play retro games, RPGs. I love watching these full playthroughs. I really wasn't even familiar, and really in 2012, the infancy of like the Let's Play on YouTube, it was still pretty young back then, and so I hadn't really been opened up to any of the gaming style content creation other than like just watching trailers and stuff. So I was really excited to get involved with that. I bought a newer MacBook and installed Windows 7 on it, bought a Elgato capture card, their first like Elgato branded card, and my very first game I streamed and beat on Twitch was Final Fantasy 13.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
You know what's funny is, as you were recounting the story of using like Adobe FME, I had a similar problem when my friends and I tried streaming on Justin TV back in 2009, 2010. And so the solution that we found to use was just buy like, you know, the best webcam at the time, which unfortunately was like 1 megapixel or something like that. And just point it at the TV and point another one at us, which is just the most terrible solution. But it's like, and mind you, I didn't use a Mac or anything like that at the time. I did have a PC, but it's still, even with the PC, like I couldn't understand like why I couldn't capture anything. And so, yeah, I was in the trenches with you, but a few years earlier, I suppose.
Yeah, eventually I built my first PC, and stream from there. I've been all over the place. I worked for and was a partner of HitBox.tv a long time ago. I was also a Mixer partner before they shut down, rest in peace. And it was really kind of after Mixer shut down that I was just really disenfranchised with streaming. I wasn't enjoying it very much anymore. And I had dabbled with YouTube stuff, and I started to talk with you on Twitter and see some of these other content creators. I'm a huge fan of one of your previous guests, Super Derek. And I was just like, why don't I do this? And I pretty much sort of abandoned streaming. I still do it once in a while just because I like to connect with some people. But otherwise, I'm all into learning how to edit in DaVinci Resolve and get excited about making better YouTube videos.
And that's really cool. And like I said before, I've been trying to get you to go to YouTube, like come to the dark side of YouTube, just also because like I've been in your exact situation. Maybe not exactly, I suppose.
Sure.
But like there's a difficult choice that you have to make when you always do streaming, especially in order to also grow your community. And I feel like it's more than a full-time job even, especially to retain the community and the people who watch you. And I kind of empathized with your situation because like you've been on HitBox, you've been on Mixer, for both of them to just die, that's crushing.
Yeah, both times.
But of course, like when I approached you, I remember saying like, but what's one platform that's not Twitch, that's still around longer than Twitch, is YouTube, and you're like, still. Well, I want to know what your reaction was when I approached you with that idea, because I genuinely want to know, like, what you think. Even if it's mean, share it anyway.
No. Here's what it was. I knew you were right. I just didn't want to do it. I mean, that's really what it came down to. You get into such a routine as a streaming-based content creator, and you focus in, you have so much equipment you buy. I mean, I'm really well lit up because I've got my nice Elgato key lights. I've still got a green screen behind me. And that's actually one of the decisions I'm working on now and talking with my wife is for forever. I've always had a space that has been my home office, but it's also complemented streaming. Now I need to really rethink that and say, yeah, it's my home office, but I need to change it up so it complements making YouTube videos better. It really is a different approach altogether. And more I find myself thinking, well, it's not about streaming. It's about making that next video and making sure the video is good and making sure the footage is captured properly and all of those things. And video editing and making them look as good as they really need to making videos look as good as they need to compete. And I use the term compete loosely, to make them stand up in the algorithm. You have to put in a lot of work. I mean, learning DaVinci Resolve has been a lot of fun, and I've gotten all the basics down. I'm really satisfied with the basic things, but now I'm looking at, okay, what can I do to elevate my videos to the next level when it comes to editing? What are some little things I can start to do that become part of the routine for every video that just make them slightly better than the last one? And with streaming, there is an element of that. And streamers who put in a lot of time, they put in a lot of work. I don't want to discount that. But there is a different style of work that goes into YouTube. And I actually think in many respects, it's harder because everything's on you in this respect. Whereas when you're streaming, you have the chat to play off of, and you have a lot of that interaction and happening there. But when it's YouTube, it's your ideas, it's your voice, it's everything coming out of your head. And you have a lot of methods to express yourself, but it's just so overwhelming. And when you initially said you need to do YouTube, I was still streaming some, and I had made a couple of videos. I'd done a review or two, and I was dabbling in it. But I feel like now that I've fully committed to it, I don't know why I would ever go back to streaming on a regular basis. It's for me, what ended up happening was it was a lifestyle change. If you want to be a streamer and actually have an audience, there's a lifestyle commitment. That says you have to start at whatever time you're going to start, and you have to be consistent. With YouTube, there is a commitment, don't get me wrong, but this commitment says I don't have to start at 7 a.m. or 7 p.m. for my stream. I can go ahead and enjoy dinner with my wife and get some of the dishes cleaned up, and then I can come downstairs and focus on playing a game, doing some VO, and not having that stress to make sure I'm ready to go at 7 o'clock to stream till 10. The other thing is I beat games much faster. So in many respects, I can cover more games and more content because when I'm not interacting with chat constantly, I have the opportunity to, just get through games. Like I'd mentioned, I beat Mass Effect 1 and 2 in like 30 total hours. And that I was almost 100% in both of the games, but I didn't have an audience. It was just me in the game.
And that's kind of the magic of YouTube, is that it really is you. You have control. And that to me is like one of the single most attractive things about it. And, yes, you'll get the views. You'll get passive income when you get monetized and stuff like that. But that's really just the tip of the iceberg. Like for me, when I moved from Twitch to YouTube, it wasn't about making money. It was more about, as you said, a lifestyle change, even like a reverse lifestyle change, because I wasn't committing time to being at 100% like on stream and stuff like that, and be like, okay, now let's go for 4 or 5 hours on this one game and just really nail it. It becomes more about like, hey, how do I want to structure my time so that I can make a video for next week or tomorrow or some such, without it negatively affecting my life. And I'm not saying that, streaming is untenable, because there have been a lot of people who have managed kids, families, and spouses with a reasonable schedule. It's just that a lot of that comes after you put in the sacrifice and the time. Like I often use Co-Carnage as a great example of this, but he did a lot of sacrifice in the beginning. He did everything that streamers would be known to do, but it didn't come without a cost. And you have to be very aware of your capabilities as a content creator and be confident enough to present yourself in a very specific way. That being said, like, I'm kind of curious now about how you got the name Dr. LevelUp, because it's very specific. And we've talked before about like maybe slightly rebranding it and not, and to be clear, I'm really glad that you didn't. And so how did you come up with this name?
Initially, my name online was my name. My last name, Mr. last name. And it's Kel, so I don't care if people know now. But at the time when I was working for HitBox and in a position where I had the ability to ban people from the site, I found that having my first and last name out there was not the best idea. Mm-hmm. And so I sat and just like, what can I do? What can I do? I love RPGs of all types. So LevelUp, I went through all sorts of permutations of it. And eventually I was just like, why not Dr. LevelUp? I like it. It's catchy. And I did the thing where you go and you make sure it's available on Twitter and Twitch and Instagram and YouTube and all of those different places. And it was clear, it was done. And I was like, I'm just going to do it. I'm going to make the big change. And so I did. And I've never regretted it. I really, really like it. A lot of people have complimented it and said, oh, that's a really nice online moniker. So, that's really why. That's how I came up with it. I just wanted to have a name that expressed the primary type of games I'm into. And it just kind of all fit together, and it was available because there's a lot of names not available. And no one else really has it. There's obviously LevelUp is somewhat of a generic term, but I have found as I've continued to use it and get it out there and use social media that it's not really been an issue. I'm not getting confused for anyone.
Right.
There's a Mr. LevelUp out there, but it's not real active or anything. So eventually I'll have more videos than Mr. LevelUp and it won't be an issue.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that's a conversation we usually have on our Discord in, bit.ly/ourbacklogbattle. We have a content creators channel there. I remember having a conversation with Miss Bubbles. She is like, yeah, there's so many other Miss Bubbles. Am I going to be okay? And I quickly searched for it. I'm like, you'll be fine. like what you said, it's like if you pump out more videos than the rest of the people, you'll eventually get to own it. Mm-hmm. I wish that was the same for Twitter handles, because somebody is twitter.com/backlogbattle.
I feel bad for you.
And they haven't logged in since 2012, 2013. And I've actually contacted Twitter about that. And Twitter just like slams the door shut in my face. I mean, let me rephrase that. I wish they would slam the door in my face because I don't get anything from them about what's going on. And so that's my sad story about like why twitter.com/mybacklogbattle is my handle on that platform. So that's very interesting, though. Like, obviously, Level Up is inspired by your love for RPGs, but let's go back in the past and finally ask the question that people are probably expecting me to ask, which is, how did you get into video games?
Well, Alex, when I was 3 years old, my dad brought home a used NES from a coworker. He brought it home in a paper sack with a stack full of games that included things like Mario Brothers 2 and 1, Duck Hunt, Spelunker.
Wow.
I don't remember specifically a lot of the other games. I do remember those because those are the ones I played the most. And Spelunker is a horrible game. If you like it, don't at me. Not to be confused with Spelunky, the new one. I want to make that clarification there. But I had that, and I really just got sucked in. I really, really enjoyed it. It was a pastime that my dad was also into, not as much as me. I really got into it. And we would play games together. The first word that I learned how to spell was pause, because whenever you would press the start button in Super Mario Brothers 3, pause would come up on the screen. So if that was like one of the first words I ever remembered how to spell consistently at 3 years old was pause. I could always spell pause.
Wow.
So yeah, that's really how it started. And my mom will say that was the beginning of the end, and it's just been part of my life ever since then. We never had the newest consoles growing up. I'm pretty sure when he brought home that NES, the Super Nintendo was already out. But I would always be a few years behind, but always enjoying really great games. If I got an A on my spelling test, each week we could go rent a new game at the local video rental store. So I was always trying to ace my spelling tests. And is when I got a Super Nintendo that my love for RPGs really began to blossom. But getting that Super Nintendo was difficult. When I was in 6th grade, I have dyslexia. And so I turned numbers and letters around all the time. And I wouldn't say I had a strong learning disability, but it definitely kept me from wanting to engage as much as I should. So my dad made me this promise. He said, if you make A's and B's on your report card in 6th grade, I will go out and buy you a brand new Super Nintendo.
Wow.
And he made me that deal in December, and the school year would finish in May. I made all A's and B's on that report card because I really wanted that Super Nintendo. So I bought it was the SNES Mini, came with Yoshi's Island 2, or Super Mario Brothers 2, or Super Mario World 2, Yoshi's Island, which is one of my favorite platformers. And then my love for RPGs began, which brought me into my favorite RPG ever, which is Super Mario RPG Legend of the Seven Stars. And from the SNES to the GameCube, the Dreamcast, the PlayStation 2, on and on and on. So
that's cool.
Yeah.
What were the aspects of Super Mario RPG that you love? Because that's a game that is very specific, right? Like, especially it's fresh for Mario at the time. Like, they've never made a Mario RPG before. I know that we have tons of them now, but that's the originator, because not only did Nintendo work on it, but Squaresoft did as well.
I think it was the fact that I really am not that great at platformers. And so many games are platformers, and especially back then. And here I could play a Mario game, and it wasn't a platformer. If I think back about what really made it stand out to me as a kid, I would say the story was really the first time I experienced a well-told video game story. Even though, looking back, Super Mario RPG's story is pretty cheesy. But for me, as a 12-year-old kid, to go on this grand adventure with Mario, I remember the first time I beat Smithy and Gino went back into Star Road. I cried as a kid because I had such an attachment to Gino. And I was like, wait, what? He has to go back? I want him to stay with me. And that music that plays there at the very end, it just resonated with me. There was this sense of accomplishment, because now I can beat Super Mario RPG. If you hand me the console, or you hand me the game, I can probably sit and beat it. And I'm not a speed runner, but I can sit and beat it from beginning to end, doing everything in probably about 15 hours. But when I was a kid, I didn't really understand how to really do equipment, and I really didn't understand how to make your party just right. And even though it was very accessible, and I really consider it one of the best starter RPGs out there, as a kid, it took me a long time to beat the game. I remember the fight on the sunken ship with Johnny, when all of a sudden it's just Mario and Johnny there. That blew me away, because all of a sudden everything I had experienced up until that point, because I normally had Gino and Bowser with me, all of a sudden they weren't there anymore. And it was just Mario v. Johnny. And I died to that section over and over and over until I finally realized that if I don't kill the two little minions and I just focus on Johnny, I don't have to do that entire section. It took me days to figure that out. So the sense of accomplishment that I got from beating the game, and the feeling of adventure that I had along with Mario and the crew, really just opened up my love for RPGs moving forward from there.
It's a really special experience when you play your first RPG or something that you really resonate with. And that seems to be something that, you know, really describes your relationship with Super Mario RPG. It really was a seminal game, you know, in your childhood and stuff. And, you know, it kind of makes me wonder what other RPGs you played at the time, because that's really high praise.
Yeah. So, interesting thing, I didn't play games like Chrono Trigger until way, way later. You know, all I really had access to at the time was my local video game rental store. We didn't buy new games. There was no money for new games. So, but there was always the $3 to rent the game for the weekend. And I remember when I beat Mario RPG, I had to rely on the fact that it would be there the next weekend and no one would have erased my save file. It happened a couple of times, but I got really good at the parts I had to repeat over and over. So I didn't play a lot of other RPGs until we got into the Dreamcast era. I went from Super Nintendo to Nintendo 64. Nintendo 64 was all about Legend of Zelda, GoldenEye, all those games. I went from the 64 to the Dreamcast. It was there on the Dreamcast that I experienced my second favorite RPG of all time, which is Grandia 2, and then also Skies of Arcadia. And it was really there that I began to really understand what RPGs were and what JRPGs were in particular. And I was also, I had a part-time job. I could afford my own games. And so that really helped in high school. And that really blew up in the doors to, basically at that point, just it was all about RPGs. After that, one of the next big ones for me was Tales of Symphonia on the GameCube. And kind of moving forward from there, but still you go back to those original ones you played, and they just have such a special place in your heart. I mean, tit for tat, there's many games that are better than Super Mario RPG, but it's still my favorite. There are many games that are better. Well, I don't know if there's a lot of games better than Grandia 2, but there are many games that are better. And, you know, I just love them. But some of the classics, like Final Fantasy VI and Chrono Trigger, I didn't experience those until you could play things on SNX 9X, the emulator on PC. Because by the time I really understood what those games were and was really open to the whole RPG world out there, I didn't have a Super Nintendo anymore. So I had to go back and try to emulate some of that stuff. And that's actually how I played and beat Chrono Trigger for the very first time, was on emulator. So, you know, it's just one of those things. Now I desperately wish I had a copy of that and Earthbound, but they are outrageously expensive.
Yeah, I can't really say much for Earthbound, but I can say that my wife has the original Chrono Trigger release and Final Fantasy III release on the Super Nintendo in a box. So that is like one of her prized possessions. Yeah, so it's really great. That being said, now that I have a pretty good understanding of the kinds of RPGs that you played, I want to bring in my guest from last week to ask you a question and offer some words of encouragement. A lot of people know him as Eric's Gaming, but I know him as Alex because he and I have the same name, and he inspired me to make the YouTube channel that I have today. So here he is. Hope you enjoy.
How's it going, Dr. LevelUp? I just want to say I just checked your channel out recently, and I think what you're doing is fantastic. I mean, the fact that you're juggling JRPGs, of all things, I mean, games take up a lot of time. JRPGs are a massive time sink, and the fact you're doing that alongside a job, I think, is super awesome. I love the sort of enthusiasm and the kind of genuine passion. Like, I checked out some of your videos recently, and you can just see the genuine passion coming through, and I think that is the most important thing. Like, when you're building a channel on YouTube, it is a long process. Like, it takes time, but like, never lose hope, because honestly, I think like you can see just how passionate you are about everything you're doing, and that honestly, long term, will be the thing that kind of takes you far. So I just say, keep doing what you're doing, keep it up, and I can't wait to sort of see, fast forward a couple of years, I'm excited to see where your channel is going to be. And as for question, I played definitely not as many as you have, but I've played my fair share of JRPGs. But which JRPG do you think is like, it's one of those ones that maybe is really, really good, but just doesn't get the attention it deserves? Is there like one that's sort of like a hidden gem? Maybe it might have even been one that hasn't been like localized in the West, but you're just like, people need to play this game. What is that JRPG? I want to know.
It's an action JRPG, but it's still a JRPG in my mind. The Twisted Tales of Spike McFang.
I don't even know that. What?
A lot of people don't know what that is. This is just kind of my gut reaction. I'm sure someone's like, oh, there's way better ones out there, but this is my gut reaction. The Twisted Tales of Spike McFang. It is an action RPG out of Japan where you play this kid vampire, and he literally runs around basically in this really fancy hat that he can throw and do damage, and basically like footy pajamas. And I just love that game. It has a really fun story and music. It's really silly. It's not very difficult now. I can beat it really quickly, but as a kid, I found it very, very challenging because it was an action game in comparison to just turn-based. But yeah, I think that's a really good hidden gem out there that not a lot of people have heard of or played. The Twisted Tales of Spike McFang.
I have to say, like, I consider myself well-versed when it comes to games, because I also play games that are normally not in my purview, or even games that normally I wouldn't cover on my channel, because I feel like it's good to be aware of what's happening elsewhere in the industry to get better context. But I've never heard of this game, which is crazy. Like, what platform was this on?
Super Nintendo. I wouldn't even begin to try to pronounce it, but it was made by a company called Red Company, which no one's probably ever even heard of.
I've actually heard of Red Company.
Yeah, those are the developers. The publishers were Bulletproof Software and Naxit Soft. And
that's strange.
It's really kind of basic when you look back at it now, but it was super fun as a kid. It had an inventory system where you could, upgrade your hat and upgrade a little bit of your armor. You had some party members that came with you. They were just kind of there. They did a little damage, but you couldn't really control them and upgrade them. But you could upgrade Spike's hat, and there was this slot machine system where you would unlock and maybe get these different cards that would do massive damage or heal your party. It was really, really fun. I really enjoyed it as a kid. It was one of those games I rented a lot. Yeah. And it's also one of the most expensive now Super Nintendo games to try to find in the used market. So I'll never own a physical copy of that game.
Wow, that is nuts.
Even the Japanese version the Super Famicom version is super, super expensive because it's so rare. Yeah.
That's crazy. Yeah. Well, I definitely learned something today, and I actually want to unpack some of the things that you said about the game, like especially the publisher and the developer, because Bulletproof Software was known to bring Alexei Pajitnov's Pipe Dream in the US. Like, it was an NES game, and it's crazy because I remember it so clearly because I even played the port that they did for the Game Boy, because my aunt used to have a Game Boy black and white, and she had Pipe Dream for some reason. I'm like, why do you have Pipe Dream? And she doesn't even know who Alexei Pajitnov is, so it's like over her head. But Red Entertainment, or Red Software, if you will, is a known quantity in Japan. They made Thousand Arms for the PlayStation. Yeah. Okay. But also outside of that, they also were responsible for several of the Sakura Wars games that we never got here. Okay. So they're also known for other games and stuff. I'm kind of blanking on the other franchises that they've touched upon. But yeah, Red Entertainment is quite prolific, I should say. So it's crazy, though, that they made that game and I've never even heard of it. But to be fair, when I was a kid and playing Super Nintendo games, it was mostly dominated by either Squaresoft games or Street Fighter or Mortal Kombat. Did you get into those games?
I'm horrible at fighting games. My wife can kick my butt as Chun-Li, but I'm just not good at all the button combinations that you have to do. Those are types of games I really, really struggle with. A lot of people are really into like the heavy action games like the Devil May Cry series, and I just can't do the combos. If I can beat the game without combos, great. But when it comes to some of those special combos and button presses, I'm just like, I'm out. I can't. It's just not my thing. And I like action games. You can give me Bloodborne, Dark Souls. I was just checking out the Stranger in Paradise Final Fantasy Origin trial beforehand. I really like that. But if it goes beyond that and goes super fast, I'm out. I can't do it.
Yeah, I have a love-hate relationship with the genre. I personally love action games in general, but it's like I'm getting to an age where fast reflexes is basically going to get to me at some point. That being said, I'm kind of adjusting a bit. You know, I'm kind of learning to be a bit more patient when it comes to these games, because normally when I was young, I would just mash through them and I would brute force my way through a lot of these. But as far as like games like Scarlet Nexus, that's a game where you can kind of play that game patiently so that way like you don't get overwhelmed by enemies. Because I selected Kasane as my character in that game, and I discovered a few hours later that I picked a character that has long range, but is inherently carrying a broadsword, basically a two-handed weapon in a way. Because even in the demo when I played it, I was like, why is Kasane so slow? You know, I was like thinking about that, whereas with Yuito, I could react like really super fast. And it's only like after hours of playing, I was like, okay. But that being said, like I kind of started appreciating the kind of gameplay style. Kind of like what you said, there are games like Devil May Cry that kind of require you to be like fast and zip left and right. A lot of Platinum games do that. But I'm beginning to appreciate games where you can kind of be methodical and be careful about your strategies and stuff. And specifically talking about action games, of course. And I'm glad that more developers are making games like this. Do you find yourself that you gravitate towards those kinds of action games lately?
I played my first Ys game this year with Ys 9 Monster Nox.
Right.
And I loved it. It obviously doesn't require as much strategy as something like Devil May Cry or even a Platinum game, but the frenetic constant action really got to me, where I was just in a zone and just going and switching out characters and powers and just go. I really, really enjoyed it. I feel like Ys 9 and Scarlet Nexus will probably get some comparison in that regard, even though you don't switch between a bunch of party members. There's just two. You use other party members' powers. And I think we'll see some comparisons there because it's really, really quick. I really, really have come to enjoy that genre a lot more than I used to. Used to be RPGs were all about the turn-based for me, but I think after experiencing a lot of Western games, like the Lord of the Rings games that were on GameCube and PlayStation 2 and the original Xbox, and things like Lord of the Rings War in the North and other action Western titles, I've come to realize I really like Japan's take on it and what they do there. It's one of those genres where I'm really finding myself exploring it more. And I know a lot of people disliked the fact that Final Fantasy VII Remake was not a turn-based RPG, but Final Fantasy VII Remake would not have been as good as a turn-based RPG, in my opinion. So I think the action genre is here to stay, but I still love and want to go back and experience the turn-based. You know, you talk about old school and growing, like you're getting a little slower. The Xbox 360 era, it's like JRPGs disappeared in my life, and I got sucked into Call of Duty and shooters for about 2 or 3 years. I played consistently with friends. I beat every single campaign on the hardest mode. I love that. I can't do any of that anymore. I am too slow. PvE, I'm good, but PvP, no, I'm out. So
the last Call of Duty game that I got was Advanced Warfare, the one with Kevin Spacey. And admittedly, I got it because I was a huge like Kevin Spacey fan and stuff. And as a villain, like he was great as a villain. Yeah, and it's kind of weird because like I've had this progression of shooters where villains are like the strongest personality in the game. Some of my favorites happen to be like Far Cry 3.
I love those.
I skipped 4, sorry, Troy, I skipped 4, but I went to 5. The father is such a great villain in that fantastic one. And I've been thinking about like 6 because, for one thing, one of the impetuses of Backlog Battle, the together part, if you will, originally was also highlighting co-op games. And for the longest time, I don't know why I thought about this, but like I thought that Far Cry 6 wasn't going to have co-op for some freaking reason. And then and through E3 and stuff, like with the Ubisoft conference, if you will, for the lack of a better term, they actually confirmed like, oh yeah, by the way, we have co-op. I'm like, great, I'm back in.
I want to know how that's going to work because your co-op partner in Far Cry 3, 4, and 5 is that goofy dude. And so I can't wait to see what it is in 6.
In 5, though, you were a custom-made character. So if you go to somebody else's game, you see their character.
That's right. Yeah, I can't. I get so sucked into the story on those things. And for Far Cry in particular, I love the fact that I can play that game nearly completely stealth. For me, as soon as I unlock the bow and arrow, I'm set. I'm going to headshot every person with a bow and arrow, take my time. That's what I like about those games. One, the story, the villain, the characters, but that I can take it at my pace, do it how I want to do it. I really enjoy games that give me that approach. Otherwise, I don't really enjoy like the crazy running and gunning anymore. I like action games, sure, but when it comes to shooters, I like to play them on the harder difficulties. So I find that I need to be able to take it at my own pace and kind of conquer each section with the tools I want to use and not what they want to make me do. I can't stand that in games when they make you do it a certain way or they take away things that you used to be able to do. And all of a sudden you can't. That's like my 2 biggest pet peeves in gaming.
Yeah. I think there's room for both. As with most things, it's all about the approach.
Sure.
Because let's dissect what video games are, especially when somebody says that X game or Y game is repetitive. I'm like, newsflash, dude. Video games are repetitive as a medium. You're doing the same gameplay loop over and over. The real question is, why didn't you enjoy it? This is not addressed as like a judgment call or a judgment question or judging somebody else. It's more along the lines of like trying to think about why you or yourself as a person don't click with that kind of content. And we all have very different answers. And I think answering that question is a more interesting endeavor to have a conversation with, as opposed to like blaming it on the developers or blaming it on somebody else. It really comes back to us sometimes. That being said, there are those games out there that are kind of janky, I mean, you and I just expressed our love for Far Cry. That's kind of janky. That game can be janky.
Open world games are always janky. I love Bethesda games. They got jank. But I still love them, but they definitely have a lot of jank. You talk about games that do that well. And as you were mentioning that, I was thinking about Final Fantasy X, actually. And the battle. Final Fantasy X's been out for a while. Spoiler alert, the battle with Lady Unalesca was a really interesting battle to me because you had to embrace the fact that your party was going to die fairly often, and it's okay because she would cast zombie on all of you. And if you needed to heal somebody who didn't have zombie casted and you wanted to do a party-wide heal, someone's going to get hurt. People are going to die. You just have to embrace it and deal with it. You're still using all the tools at your disposal. You just have to think about those tools in a really different way. I like games that do that still let you have everything, but they're putting some really interesting limitations on you where you've got to really think outside the box and accept that this is going to be how you defeat this boss or do this thing. Even though we haven't limited you, you've got to get creative. And that's one of my favorite things. Boss battles, or any type of battle, but particularly boss battles in JRPGs, I really want to see developers get more and more creative with how they want us to conquer it. Yeah, of course, there's weaknesses and things like that, but I think there's interesting stories you can tell with the type of power that you have. I remember when I was fighting Lady Unalesca, and you're talking about this cycle of death and life and death and life. I realized, well, that's basically what Final Fantasy X is this constant cycle of death and life that eventually we defeat. So I just think that there's so much potential in storytelling, even in combat, even in turn-based combat, that developers can really key into that is untapped potential. that I haven't really seen out there. Chrono Trigger does it really, really well, where everything's very scenario based and you have these really epic moments and you probably want to use certain powers on certain things and find the patterns. As much as I like in action games to be able to level up and grind, I still want in a turn-based game to be able to think about, okay, what's the best approach to defeat this boss? What can I learn about this character world and story through this boss that I'm fighting?
I do find it interesting how you're describing your thoughts about that Final Fantasy X boss, because it kind of parallels how you described your experience in Super Mario RPG and why you liked that game. And so I don't know if you recognize that there is a lot of very strong parallels between the way that you approach talking about JRPGs and your very favorite Super Nintendo game.
No, I didn't even think about that. Unpack this a little bit with me here.
I don't know how, because you've been unpacking it for the past hour or so.
Oh, I've never even really made that connection before. Yeah, it's video games have such an ability to tell incredible story in every moment, every single moment. In particular, you go back to Super Mario RPG, and I remember the moment Bowser joins your party. That blew my mind as a kid. That this guy that I have been spending most of my life trying to defeat is now my pal, and we got to do this together. That act alone of him joining your party and you coming together and Bowser humbling himself a little bit to realize I've got to have Mario to get my keep back. It's such a powerful moment in games, in my opinion. It's just really incredible. That's that tiny bit of story, that little thing that they did. Bowser didn't have to join your party in that game. You had plenty of other people. The fact that Princess Peach comes in and she's also a party member. Everything you knew about Princess Peach being a defenseless character up until that point completely goes out the window, because once you give her that frying pan, she's going to destroy everything that gets in her way. And I think my favorite thing about video games is the developer's ability to subvert my expectations. I want that shock and surprise and awe. That's one of my favorite things about like E3 time and watching all these developer conferences and things like that. This year was a little bit not as great, but there's a good reason for that. It's been hard to develop video games these last couple of years. But even so, there were just a few surprises where I was like, yes, that's so awesome. I didn't know they were going to do that. And I remember Reggie Fils-Aimé, the former president of Nintendo, mentioning that one of their big things, I can hear him say it, the word surprise and delight. And I really feel like when game developers and companies and publishers think about how can we surprise and delight these people who love what we're doing so very much, that's when they create those powerful moments in gaming that we as the player will never forget. Even when it comes down to the initial reveal of the game, all the way till the credits roll, I think when they think about it from that perspective, they're going to create such a synergy, maybe synergy is the right word, just this power behind it that it's going to make the game even more memorable from beginning to end.
Mm-hmm. I think that's well said. One of the things that kept kind of rolling around in my brain as you're saying all this is that, yes, at the time Super Mario RPG got released, you are right to say that up until that point, we've only known Bowser as a villain. Mm-hmm. Of course, many decades later, we've had games where Bowser is a playable character. He's even in Mario Kart, obviously, and in many capacities. But I can only imagine how powerful that moment was for you when that happened. It was like, oh, surprise, you get Bowser as a party member. Like, what? Yeah. Like, what? And that's the kind of thing that you can't replicate these days, right? Like, you can't.
Yeah, it's tough.
It's very tough. You need to kind of almost figure out another way to do it. I think trying to surprise and delight is a very difficult job. But I think what Nintendo does extremely well is to be able to accomplish something like that with, I don't want to say minimal amount of effort, but by being smart about where they put their time. And that's one of the reasons why I admire Nintendo as a company deeply. Now, granted, I've been more of a PlayStation player over the past decade or so, and even sometimes with Microsoft, but you can't deny the talent that's at that company.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, you want to talk about surprise, going back to that Bowser thing. Bowser's the CEO of president of Nintendo of America now. Yeah. So it's like, so we have that as a surprise, I suppose. Like, I remember when his appointment got announced, a lot of people were like, that can't be his last name. Like, that can't be it. As if like Bowser was exclusively like a Nintendo thing for years or something. But it's just kind of cute.
Yeah.
To go back to what you said though about the Final Fantasy X boss as well, I know we're kind of bouncing around a little bit, and I know this is a thread that hasn't been brought back for a while because I haven't had guests that have talked about this game. But when you were describing that specific fight, it reminded me of a fight in Final Fantasy XIV where a similar thing happens, where the boss casts a spell called Mega Death. Mm-hmm. And what you needed to do in that particular raid fight, there are these pools on the ground that give you a zombie status effect, and you're supposed to go in there, get the status effect, so that when the boss casts Megadeth, you don't die. Right. And I remember going into that fight where we had no, for the first time, we had no idea how the fight went, and we just all 24 players just died, and we're like, what happened?
Yeah.
You did mention before that you used to play MMOs. So what was that experience like, and why are you not playing it anymore?
My experience with MMOs is primarily centered around one game, and that is City of Heroes. That game was my first MMO before. I mean, I'd played like some old school, like top-down Growl Online way back in the dial-up days, but this was my first MMO. And it had such a unique ability to allow you to express yourself. The costume creator is one of the best out there ever. The unique powers that you could have. The gameplay and combat was just very MMO. You click the power, you do the thing. Yeah. But it was the self-expression that came through the really, really robust costume creator that made the game so fun. Also, playing with people made it a lot of fun. And I found myself getting pretty addicted to it. Games that don't end, that don't really have an ending loop, aren't good for me. I will just stay in the grind. There's a reason why I don't really play things like Destiny. As much as you all talk so much about Final Fantasy XIV, and I am going to play Final Fantasy XIV someday. I know it does have the main quest line, and you can just play it all the way through, do the raids, and really have a definitive experience and be done. But with City of Heroes, I played it a lot. I actually probably got a little bit too much into it. Eventually, it shut down. I think November 2011, they announced the shutdown of that game. Recently, though, now it was 2019, all the source code and online files surfaced, and someone recreated it. And I can log in and play right now if I wanted to on these illegal servers. And a really interesting thing happened to me when I did that. I went back, of course, the second I knew I could. I was like, I'm going to recreate all my favorite characters. I found that I really lost myself to it. In fact, something really, really interesting happened. I look back at my list of videos I've created in the last year, and I see the giant gaps that happened. And that's when I was so sucked in that I wasn't playing anything else but that. And so because of that, because of my inability to shut that down, I have just had to avoid games that don't have a definitive beginning and end. I will get far too addicted. It's unfortunate, but at the same time, MMOs really are, again, if you love MMOs, please don't kill me. They really are the same thing. It's the same story. The story's not even told that well. I know Final Fantasy XIV is a little different, but I would just rather play a game, beat it from beginning to end, have a different gameplay experience, and go to the next. And so I found, I had to go in and literally have someone change all my passwords for all of this, so I could not go into it. It was just that much for me. And so now I'm really only a few months out of that, to be honest.
Wow.
So now I'm finding myself, really diving into appreciating appreciating the fact that there is a lot of variety out there, and really just diving into all these stories that I really love and connecting with those characters that I really, really love. I realized that if I kept doing that over and over, I would just miss out on so much. My ability to actually be a good content creator. I am a good content creator, but if I don't create content, it's just not out there, right?
Yeah.
I'm not the best, but I know how to do it, and I can be, and anybody can be successful if they put in the time and the work. And I just wasn't doing it. My backlog, speaking of backlog, was just getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And so I had to shut it down and just say, I'm not going to do this anymore. Sure, it was really great to go and see it all again, but I don't do that. I don't do Destiny. Any other games that don't have a definitive beginning and end. I just can't. Otherwise, I will just get so sucked in.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I think that's very big of you to recognize a problem and kind of act upon it, as opposed to like kind of perpetuating it, because one of the most difficult things about gamers in terms of their behavior is that because of the repeated loops that we're exposed to in games, we have a very difficult time disattaching ourselves from the quote-unquote monotony of the experience, that we kind of apply that in our real lives as well. It's just like, all right, well, breakfast, lunch, dinner, play MMO, that sort of thing. And that's not to say that, there aren't ways to control that. Obviously,
sure,
like
absolutely.
you did something, really creative with that. But like it's definitely commendable what you did, and I just wanted to say that because it's very difficult, and I hope this doesn't come across again as like trying to pander about Final Fantasy 14, but to kind of share my personal experience of the game, I could see you spending a lot of hours on it, and so in a way, like that's kind of like why I'd stopped pushing the idea too much, because there is a finite end. But unlike all those MMOs that you played, your character could be their job or their class can be switched to another one,
I know.
And you have another story. Because if there's one thing that Final Fantasy 14 is going to hook you, it's not necessarily just the gear grind or anything like that. Although it's really easy going all the way up to the max level, but also the storytelling. Because there is a million stories that's in there, whether it's a side quest or literally one of the new classes or jobs in the game. They all have individual stories, and you can literally spend hours. I had a friend who joined Final Fantasy 14 last year, and after pushing him to try it again after so long, like I think I worked on him for like 2 years or something like that, worked on him for 2 years and stuff like that. By this time, he had spent about 500 hours in the game, for a whole year. And he's not even caught up to the latest storyline, And so, again, like, I feel like it's all about moderation. And for me and my wife, when we play Final Fantasy 14, we do the gear grind every weekend. Like, we max out our tomestones, which is the end game currency, and we spend about 3 or 4 hours a day, for 2 days to do that sort of thing, or maybe even not. And in the interim, we play other games. Like I play other games for review. And you are right when you said that by not obsessing about an MMO, like, or living a life inside these worlds, like, to the extent that you've demonstrated before, you do get to see what else is out there, like the beauty of the current landscape. Because that happened to me as well with Final Fantasy 11. Yeah, and it was, I spent so much time in that game that for about a year or two, like, I had not played any games that have come out. And so what happened to me around 2008, 2009, I had actually bought a lot of the catalog on the PS2 that I wanted to play and catch up on, and they're still downstairs. They haven't been played yet because backlog battle, right?
Right.
but I can look at them and be like, well, if I feel like playing them, I can actually go back and do that. And that's actually how I discovered Persona, which is really crazy.
That's another game, Persona 5 Royal. I'm just like, I need to play that game.
Yeah.
I love JRPGs, and I love how long they are, but sometimes they're really long.
Sometimes they are really long.
Yeah. I think my final playtime for Yakuza Like a Dragon is like 78 hours or something like that.
Little short of like my playtime for my review.
I know that I didn't do every single one of those sub stories. I tried. Adventure's like, I gotta wrap this up. So, and speaking of, I can't not come on Backlog Battle Podcast, and can we just gush about Yakuza Like a Dragon for a couple of minutes? Would that be okay?
A couple of minutes, sure.
I just want to say it is now, in all honesty, it's Yakuza Like a Dragon, Super Mario RPG, Legend of the Seven Stars, Grandia, and I don't know what comes after that, but it took the top spot.
Wow.
Gameplay wise, it's pretty basic when it comes to turn-based RPG, but the story, they are an incredible group of storytellers, and Ichiban Kasuga is an incredible character in his. I just love it so very much.
But it's also a reflection of what we talked about before, where it's not really about the minutia of the mechanics sometimes, but the approach in which you use those tools. I was on a podcast a few months ago where we talked about content creation. And I know this sounds like a really weird tangent, but on that show, we talked about how a lot of streamers who are starting out start spending expensive amounts of money on like gear and all that stuff, which is great, especially if you're sponsored and all that stuff,
sure.
And you're making money out of that. But these are new people that are starting out. And the way that I talked about it was that it's not really about how expensive your tools are. There's a reason why they're called tools. And in a very similar way in game development, the gameplay, as you've so eloquently stated earlier, is a tool to tell the story. And I think something that mirrors your opinion of the game that I really personally loved was when I first heard that you have to go to an employment agency to change your job. I was like, this is brilliant. Like, I'm already in love with this, and I don't even have it to play. Just the minor details that you put in. And again, it's all about using the tools in the right way. They nailed it.
Yeah, it's certainly elevated, in my opinion, the ability of a Japanese role-playing game developer to tell a story that is above and beyond one of the best stories ever.
Wow.
In gaming. I mean, it's obviously a crime drama, and it's in that genre. But you compare its story to other big JRPGs out there, it stands right next to them as some of the best. And I think that that's the interesting thing. But here's the thing. If it weren't a JRPG, if Yakuza Like a Dragon would have been like the previous Yakuza games or like Judgment, it wouldn't be the best JRPG ever, or one of the best JRPGs ever. It wouldn't be one of the top ones ever. It was their choice to really pivot, which is really interesting. I can't wait to see, now that they've had the combat mechanics, they've done one JRPG, what they do with the next one. Because the only direction they can go from here is up. Because their storytelling, they know how to tell incredible stories. So I'm just really excited. I need to play more of that, more of their games. I want to play Judgment, but it's just on the backlog.
I think we'll get a sequel for that next year. Pretty sure.
So. Oh,
Pretty
man,
sure.
I'm ready.
Yeah. That actually brings me to my last question for the day. You mentioned Judgment. Lost Judgment is coming in the fall. I guess like my question then is like, are you going to get into Judgment sometime soon?
I think so. I don't really have an excuse not to. It's on Xbox now. I have all the consoles. I primarily play on Xbox because it's where most of my friends are, and I prefer the controller. I know some people will be like, why don't you like the DualShock? I just don't love it. But now that it's on Xbox, I will more than likely play it soon. I want to find some time for it before the fall releases come out. But we'll have to see. The thing that really honestly kept me from the series before Yakuza, all of them, was I don't really like playing games without English VO. And that's actually what kept me from it. So with Judgment, I have no excuse.
You have no excuse.
I have no excuse. And that's like one of the things with JRPGs. So many companies need to consider getting English VO, because I think their games would sell better in the United States, particularly anime. Anime style games, the Atelier games. I wanted to love Atelier Ryza, but the fact that it wasn't in English was really a barrier for me. Mm-hmm. I really, really struggled to connect with the characters. So hopefully they'll do that with more and more games, and that's why I should go back and play Judgment. Oh man, the localization team for that studio is incredible, and the voice actors they hire and actresses they hire are just top notch. So
yeah, they really are. They're great.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us for this show. It's, what I find really funny about this, Steven, is that every time I bring a guest on here, we always end the show when things are leading into something else. Yeah. And this is another one of those episodes where it's obvious that we can fill another episode with a whole ton of content. And that 2 minutes went by in 10. So, there you go. So, but before we go, I want people to know where they can find you, because this is really important. I flubbed this up at least one time and I didn't ask somebody to plug. So I'm making a concerted effort to basically ask you where people can find you and how can they enjoy your content.
YouTube.com/DrLevelUp, Twitter.com/DrLevelUp, and that's DR Level Up, the abbreviation. So I'm there. I tweet pretty regularly. I try to put out videos once a week. We're close, maybe 2 or 3 days off from that. But I'll be, by the time you're listening to this, we'll be getting really hyped for things like Tales of Arise. So
that's great. Yeah. That's really awesome. Well, again, thank you so much for joining us. It's been a pleasure, and thank you to everybody who's actually listening or watching this show. And in case you don't know, you can actually watch this show on YouTube at the brand new Backlog Battle podcast channel. So go check it out. And of course, leave a comment and subscribe to the channel. I think you guys will have a fantastic time watching and anticipating the next episode, which will come out on Wednesday at 12 a.m. Pacific time without fail. So until next week, we'll see you guys later, and happy gaming.